The billionaire flicked champagne in the Mafia boss's face and laughed. Seconds later, he was beaten to his knees. The laughter echoed off marble and gold, mingling with the soft notes of a string quartet. Villa Aurea, Cassian Drexler III's hilltop masterpiece, shimmered like a temple built to vanity. Beneath its crystal chandeliers, the city's elite raised flutes of Dom Pérignon, unaware they were about to witness the unraveling of a man who believed money made him untouchable. Cassian Drexler was everything the tabloids worshipped: self-made billionaire, casino king, and self-proclaimed savior of Raventon City. Tonight was his annual charity gala, a parade of tuxedos, diamonds, and carefully practiced smiles. Every detail was curated to project control: the gold leaf invitations, the velvet curtains, the orchestra tuned to perfection. Then Ronan the Viper Valtieri walked in. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Even the chandeliers appeared to dim, as though the mansion itself sensed danger. Ronan didn't belong here, and yet he moved through the crowd like a shadow that refused to be ignored. His black suit was perfectly tailored, his tattoos peeking subtly from his cuffs like whispered threats. A silver viper pin gleamed on his lapel. He didn't carry a weapon. He didn't need to. "Who invited that?" whispered a senator's wife. Cassian smirked from across the ballroom, glass in hand. "I did," he said to no one in particular. "A little entertainment never hurts." The billionaire strutted toward Ronan with the swagger of a man who had bought too many people to believe anyone could resist his charm. His reflection glided beside him in the mirrored walls, sharp-suited, smiling, untouchable. "Ronan Valtieri," Cassian announced loudly enough for the orchestra to pause. "I wasn't sure if they'd let you in." "Dress code's stricter than your prison cell, isn't it?" Soft laughter rippled through the audience. Ronan's expression didn't change. "You sent the invitation, Mr. Drexler. I assumed you wanted me here." "Oh, I do," Cassian said. "Thought we could finally clear up that little misunderstanding about the casino project. I pay my debts, you see, but yours is imaginary." Ronan's voice was low, steady. "Some debts aren't paid in money." The room quieted. Cassian tilted his head, amused. "You think you can threaten me here? In my own house? Wouldn't dream of it." Ronan's eyes moved slowly across the guests. "You already brought everyone who matters." The billionaire raised his flute. "To power," he said, grinning. "The kind only money buys." Ronan looked at the glass. "Careful," he said softly. "It spills easily." Cassian laughed, tipping his champagne toward Ronan's face. Golden liquid splashed across the Mafia boss's cheek, dripping onto his collar. The crowd gasped. "There," Cassian said. "Now you look expensive enough to be here." The quartet stopped playing. Waiters froze mid-step. Silence filled the hall like smoke before fire. Ronan slowly reached for a napkin, dabbed his face clean, and placed the soaked linen on the nearest table. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. Cassian spread his arms. "What are you going to do? Call your thugs? This isn't the street, Valtieri. This is civilization." A faint smile touched Ronan's lips. "Civilization is fragile, Cassian. All it takes is one crack." Cassian chuckled, turning to his guests. "You see? The man still believes in honor. Tell me, Ronan, do you even know what century you're in?" Ronan didn't answer. His gaze swept past Cassian's security team. 6 men stationed around the ballroom. Each one avoided eye contact. "Go on," Cassian taunted. "Show these fine people how scary the big bad wolf can be." But Ronan only said, "I don't need to raise my voice to make myself heard." The chandelier light caught the tattoos on his wrist. Subtle, serpentine, the mark of his family. Cassian's confidence faltered for half a heartbeat before arrogance patched it over. "Enough games," he snapped. "You came here for something. Name your price." "I already told you," Ronan said. "It isn't money I came for." Cassian's laughter echoed once more, loud and brittle. "Then you came for humiliation. Let's give you some." He turned to his bodyguards. "Escort Mr. Valtieri out." No one moved. "Did you not hear me?" Cassian barked. Still silence. The head of security, Marcus Vale, met Ronan's eyes for a split second. Something unspoken passed between them. Cassian's smirk began to crack. Ronan stepped closer, his voice almost a whisper. "You built your world on fear, Cassian. But fear is a coin that spends both ways." Cassian tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "You think you can scare me in my own home?" Ronan's reply was almost kind. "Not scare. Remind." From somewhere in the crowd, a large LED wall flickered to life, its gold-trimmed edges glowing against the marble. Cassian frowned. He hadn't ordered a presentation. Then the screen lit fully, revealing a frozen image, his company logo, followed by folders labeled EVICTIONS, BRIBES, DEATHS. Gasps rippled through the room. "Turn that off!" Cassian shouted. No one moved. The files began to open. Video clips, audio recordings, documents stamped with his signature. Every dirty secret he'd buried now burned in high definition across his own ballroom. Ronan didn't look at the screen. He kept his eyes on Cassian. "You called me an animal once," he said softly. "Tonight you'll see which one of us is civilized." Cassian lunged, but one of his guards caught his shoulder, not roughly but firmly. Cassian froze. The man's cuff slid back just enough to reveal a faint tattoo. A silver viper. Cassian's voice trembled. "What is this?" Ronan finally smiled. "A lesson in loyalty." The billionaire stood surrounded by silence and betrayal, the light from the LED screen painting his reflection across the marble floor. A man drowning in his own golden empire. Outside, thunder rolled across Raventon's hills. Inside, Cassian Drexler's kingdom began to crack. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us keep these stories alive, and trust me, the best part is yet to come. Now let's get back to it. The storm broke before dawn. Lightning crawled across the skyline, tracing the jagged silhouette of Raventon City's industrial quarter. Beneath the thunder, the harbor slept uneasily, cranes creaking like old bones, ships groaning against their ropes. The city's wealth glittered miles away on its hilltops, but here, at the docks, the air tasted of salt, oil, and forgotten men. Ronan Valtieri stood at the edge of Pier 19, the hem of his coat brushing against the wind. Below him, the black water mirrored the flickering lights of warehouses where his empire had quietly grown. Not through greed, but through grit and loyalty. To some, he was a myth. To others, a savior with blood on his hands. To his enemies, he was the viper, the man who never struck twice. He lit a cigarette, its orange glow flaring briefly against the rain. The night's events at Villa Aurea replayed in his mind. The champagne, the silence, Drexler's pale face beneath the chandelier. Justice, he thought, rarely made a sound when it landed. Behind him, footsteps echoed over the wet planks. A familiar voice said, "It's done. The files are everywhere now. Every outlet's running it." Ronan didn't turn. And Drexler? Locked himself in his penthouse. His lawyers are scrambling. Half his board just resigned. Good. Ronan exhaled smoke into the wind. Let him drown in the silence he built around others. The man beside him, Matteo, his oldest lieutenant, hesitated before speaking again. "You finally did it, Ronan. After all these years." Ronan's eyes drifted across the Black Sea. "Not yet," he said quietly. "Justice isn't done until he feels what Luca felt." Flashback. 10 years earlier. The docks hadn't changed much since that winter. The same fog, the same smell of wet rope and diesel. But back then, the Valtieris weren't kings of the waterfront. They were dockhands barely scraping by. Ronan worked nights loading cargo, while his younger brother Luca studied during the day and helped at their mother's bakery in the old Italian quarter. Luca had been everything Ronan wasn't. Soft-spoken, idealistic, with a heart too big for the city's rusted soul. He wanted to build ships one day, to make things that carry people somewhere better. But dreams, in Raventon, were expensive. When Drexler's development company began buying up the harbor blocks, no one thought much of it. Urban renewal, they called it. But renewal meant eviction, entire families driven from their homes with forged notices and uniformed thugs. Ronan remembered the morning it happened. The sound of boots in the street, his mother screaming, Luca standing between their bakery door and a man in a blue suit who waved papers like a weapon. "They said it wasn't legal," Matteo's voice echoed from memory, but Drexler's men didn't wait for the courts. When the first shove came, Luca didn't fight back. When the second came, he hit the pavement. By the time Ronan arrived, his brother was already gone, a cracked skull on frozen concrete, and a crowd too afraid to speak. That night, the world went quiet for Ronan Valtieri. He found the man who'd led the eviction a week later, a local enforcer on Drexler's payroll. Ronan didn't kill him. He simply marked him. A single cut across the cheek, deep enough to scar, shallow enough to heal. "Tell your boss," he'd said. "The Viper doesn't strike twice." But he never misses. It was the first time he'd said the name out loud. The streets made sure it stuck. The code of the Viper. Ronan didn't build his reputation through blood, at least not only through blood. His empire grew on something rarer. Trust. Every man under his command had once been failed by the system Drexler thrived in. Ex-cops, dockhands, soldiers forgotten after wars no one remembered. He gave them rules, 5 of them, carved into the warehouse wall. Never lie to your own. Never touch the innocent. Loyalty before fear. Respect over riches. Strike once. Strike clean. They called it the Viper's Creed. By the time the police realized who he was, Ronan had already woven himself into the city's fabric, funding churches, protecting neighborhoods, feeding families. Politicians whispered his name like a warning. Priests mentioned him in confession. He wasn't a saint, but in a city where the rich devoured the poor, he was balance. Back to the present. The rain eased into a soft drizzle. Matteo passed him an umbrella, which Ronan ignored. "You could have killed him tonight," Matteo said. "No one would have stopped you." Ronan's lips curved faintly. Death is merciful. He needed something colder. Humiliation? Remembrance. Ronan looked toward the dim outline of the city skyline, where Villa Aurea glittered faintly atop the hill. Men like Drexler believe they own the world because they've never seen it crumble from beneath their feet. Tonight, I made him watch the floor vanish. Matteo nodded, silent for a while. You know, the others still talk about Luca. Ronan's expression softened. He was better than all of us. Would he have wanted this? Ronan's jaw tightened. He wanted justice. I gave it form. For a long moment, only the rain answered. Then Matteo reached into his coat and handed Ronan a white envelope. The paper was thick, embossed with gold lettering. Villa Aurea Annual Gala. Invitation only. Ronan's brow lifted. You're late. I already attended. Matteo shook his head. Not that one. This was sent 2 weeks ago. Before tonight. Ronan opened it. Inside, a formal card printed with Cassian Drexler's signature and a note written by his PR director. Mr. Drexler would be honored to extend an olive branch to Mr. Ronan Valtieri and the Valtieri Syndicate in the spirit of cooperation and peace. A photo of the event theme was attached. Rebuilding the city together. Ronan almost laughed. Peace, he murmured, tracing the gilded letters with his thumb. The word felt foreign on his tongue. Matteo looked at him carefully. You knew he'd bait you. That's why I went. You planned it before the invitation? Ronan nodded once. Cassian Drexler doesn't believe in peace. He believes in theater. I simply gave the audience a better show. He slipped the invitation back into the envelope, folded it once, and tucked it into his coat pocket. The irony, he said softly, is that he invited me to his own execution. All I did was show up. The meaning of the viper. As dawn broke, the first light touched the sea, turning it from black to silver. Ronan flicked away his cigarette and watched the ripples vanish into the mist. To most men, the viper was a symbol of fear. Swift, silent, deadly, but to Ronan it meant something different. A viper didn't hunt for sport. It struck only when cornered, only when provoked. Its venom wasn't rage. It was balance. Luca had once told him that vipers were misunderstood creatures. They only bite when they're stepped on. Now, years later, that truth had become prophecy. Ronan turned to Matteo, his coat glistening with rain. Do you know what peace really is? Matteo frowned. What? Peace, Ronan said, slipping his hands into his pockets, is just another stage for war. The quiet before men decide what they're willing to lose. He started walking toward the waiting car. The rain had stopped, but the air still hummed with thunder. Behind him, the docks groaned and whispered his name. Valtieri. And somewhere, high above the city, Cassian Drexler sat alone in his glass palace, replaying the moment he'd thought himself untouchable, and the man who'd proved him wrong. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe and like this video. It helps more people discover stories like this one. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, take a deep breath, because what happens next will change everything. Morning sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Drexler estate, gilding everything it touched in a sterile sort of perfection. The chandeliers were still, the air heavy with polish and money. Cassian Drexler stood in front of the mirror of his private study, rehearsing words that tasted noble and false at once. A future built on integrity, he began, letting his voice glide like silk. Where industry meets conscience, and where progress never forgets its people. He smiled faintly, admiring the cadence. His PR director had written it, but Cassian knew how to make it sound like his truth. He paced, holding the cue cards loosely, as though any real leader would never need them. Integrity, he repeated, softer now. That's what they want to hear. Integrity and vision. Behind him, the city glittered beyond the glass, Raventon City, his city. He owned most of what shone there. The docks, the refineries, the contracts that fed the skyline. What the glass didn't show were the lawsuits locked away in drawers, the bribes wrapped as donations, and the silenced voices of workers who'd bled for his empire. He stopped pacing and looked at the reflection again. Integrity, he whispered, almost amused. What a pretty lie. A soft knock interrupted him. Evelyn entered, tall and flawless in her mourning robe, eyes the color of cold marble. She didn't smile, she rarely did. "The florist is here," she said. "They need confirmation on the centerpiece arrangements for tonight." Cassian didn't look away from the mirror. White orchids. Always white. They photograph best against the crystal. Her gaze lingered on him, detached but assessing. "You seem anxious." He chuckled, slipping a cufflink into place. "I seem prepared." "You seem cornered," she replied, crossing to the sideboard to pour herself coffee. "Every time you host one of these galas, you get that same look, like a general who doesn't trust his own army." He turned, studying her. "That's why I win, Evelyn. Because I trust no one completely." She sipped her drink, unbothered. "You've built quite the empire, Cassian. Just make sure you don't drown in the glass walls you love so much." Her words lingered after she left, the faint scent of jasmine following her out. Cassian straightened his tie, ignoring the echo of warning in her tone. Glass walls are transparent, he thought, not fragile. Moments later, Marcus Vale stepped into the room, tall, scarred, and perfectly silent until spoken to. A former mercenary turned head of security, Marcus had eyes like tempered steel and a voice that could cut through smoke. "All clear for tonight," he said, handing Cassian a digital tablet. "Security sweeps are done. The guest list is confirmed." Cassian took the tablet and skimmed through the names. Senators, CEOs, celebrities, the city's most obedient sycophants. Then his thumb paused. One name gleamed like poison in the list. "Ronan Valtieri," Cassian read aloud, the syllables tasting of disdain. "Tell me this is a joke." Marcus's face didn't shift. "It's not." His RSVP came through one of your PR team's outreach batches. "Open invitation," they said, a gesture of goodwill. Cassian laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Goodwill, from me to him. The irony's unbearable." He tossed the tablet onto the table. "Do they think I've forgotten who that street rat is?" "Should I have his entry blocked?" Marcus asked. Cassian shook his head, a slow smile forming. "No. Let him come. Let him dress up, pretend he belongs in the same room as the people who run this city. If he shows his face, I'll make sure he leaves reminded who holds the leash." Marcus nodded once. "Understood." As the door shut behind him, Cassian drifted towards the window again. The city sprawled beneath him, towers, highways, the smog curling above the old quarters like a ghost. He had once promised himself he'd erase every trace of the filth he came from, the dockside chaos, the men who'd called him Cass, with greasy hands and crooked grins. Now he owned the skyline that had once mocked him. But lately, even victory felt brittle. The markets trembled. Whispers of an audit snaked through his boardrooms. The mayor owed him favors. The police chiefs bent like reeds in his wind. And yet something unseen pressed against him, testing the glass walls of his kingdom. His phone buzzed. "Mr. Drexler," came the crisp voice of a journalist, Ava Lennox from the Raventon Ledger. "I wanted to confirm a rumor before we print. Is it true that Ronan Valtieri will be attending your gala tonight?" Cassian leaned back in his chair, letting the silence stretch. "You're always quick, Ms. Lennox," he said finally, voice smooth as oil. Yes, he's been invited. Consider it a gesture of civility. Even predators can share a stage, can't they? So there's no bad blood? He smiled faintly. If he comes, he'll leave reminded who runs Raventon. Ava hesitated, sensing the undercurrent. Care to go on record with that? I just did. He ended the call before she could respond, the smirk lingering on his lips. Then, almost absently, he pressed his palm to the glass pane, feeling the faint hum of the city below. The reflection wavered slightly, just a trick of light. But for a moment his face seemed fractured, split by invisible cracks running through the mirror's surface. He blinked, and it was gone. Glass, he murmured, perfectly clear. Perfectly strong. But his eyes betrayed a flicker, the kind of fear only men with everything to lose could feel. Outside, the wind shifted, rattling faintly against the pane. Somewhere in the distance, church bells tolled noon. And for the briefest second, Cassian thought he heard something else beneath them. A low, patient hiss, like a viper waiting in the grass. The gala began like an illusion, chandeliers glittering like captured stars, laughter chiming over the low hum of an orchestra. The Drexler estate was a monument to wealth, marble pillars, glass walls, and a ceiling painted with gods who had clearly never known hunger. Outside, a convoy of black sedans and shimmering limousines coiled around the circular drive, their doors opening to release Raventon's elite, senators, tycoons, socialites, each one perfumed and polished, hungry for proximity to power. They entered in murmurs and practiced smiles, voices laced with gossip. The air carried a subtle tension, the kind that comes when predators share a room. "Did you hear?" whispered one hedge fund director to another. "They say he invited him." "The Viper?" "No one else fits that name. I thought he was just a rumor." Every rumor begins with truth. The whisper traveled like smoke. By the time the orchestra reached its third movement, half the hall knew. Cassian Drexler, ever the showman, had invited the most dangerous man in Raventon to his table. It was either an act of arrogance or fear disguised as courage. And then, as if conjured by that thought, he appeared. Ronan Valtieri entered through the side corridor. No guards, no grand announcement, just the soft weight of his presence. The crowd didn't see him at first. They felt him. The music faltered, the cellist's bow pausing mid-air. Conversations thinned into silence. A ripple of unease moved through the hall. He wore black, not the tailored kind that hugged vanity, but the quiet armor of someone who'd buried too many men to care about trends. His tattoos disappeared beneath his sleeves, but the faint lines along his neck told stories older than this ballroom. His gaze was steady, not hostile, but it carried the promise of reckoning. Cassian turned when he felt the silence shift. His grin was precise, camera ready. "Ronan Valtieri," he announced, as though introducing a celebrity instead of a ghost. "Our city's most misunderstood philanthropist." The room tittered nervously. Someone laughed too loudly. Ronan's mouth curved slightly, not a smile, more like the acknowledgement of a predator humoring its prey. He didn't bow, didn't extend his hand. He simply moved through the sea of wealth as if it parted for him. And it did. From the balcony above, Evelyn Drexler watched with the expression of a queen assessing an invader. Her silver gown caught the light like frost. She leaned toward Marcus Vale, her voice barely a breath. "You know who that is?" "I do," Marcus replied, jaw tight. "And I know he doesn't come uninvited." Evelyn's eyes flicked toward her husband below. "Cassian thinks this is theater." Marcus's tone was flat. It might end as one, but not the way he expects. Across the room, Ronan stopped near the fountain centerpiece, a glass sculpture of cascading hands, eternally offering water that wasn't real. He studied it for a moment, then took a drink from a passing waiter's tray, his reflection fractured by the shifting glass. Cassian approached with his perfect smile, flanked by politicians and CEOs who pretended not to shrink behind him. "Mr. Valtieri," he said smoothly, extending a hand that Ronan ignored. "I didn't expect you'd actually come." "I go where truth hides," Ronan replied, voice low, "and your parties hide plenty." A few nervous chuckles fluttered among the guests. Cassian's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened, twin shards of cold sapphire. "You've always had a taste for drama." "And you've always mistaken theater for power," Ronan said, sipping his drink. For a moment, the air between them thickened. Evelyn descended the stairs like descending judgment, and Marcus shadowed her every step, scanning the room. A few of the security guards by the columns shifted, exchanging subtle glances, almost imperceptible, but Ronan noticed. They weren't all Cassian's men. The orchestra resumed under the weight of unspoken tension. Cassian raised a glass, signaling the beginning of his speech. "Friends," he began, his voice amplified through crystal speakers. "Tonight, we celebrate unity, the strength of Reventon's finest, our businesses, our dreams, our city. And among us is a man often misunderstood, yet undeniably influential. Mr. Ronan Valtieri." Applause followed, thin and hesitant. Cassian continued, the politician in him alive and thriving. "Let this night remind us that peace, not rivalry, is the true measure of greatness." The irony hung heavy. Evelyn's gaze flicked toward Ronan, measuring his stillness. He neither clapped nor smiled. When Cassian's toast ended, the orchestra swelled again. Glasses clinked, masks reset. And beneath it all, Ronan's calm endured, an island amid vanity. Marcus leaned slightly toward Evelyn. "He's not here to make peace." "I know," she whispered. "Peace is just another word for distraction." Cassian made his rounds, laughing too loudly, shaking hands that trembled slightly. Each exchange was rehearsed, every smile forced. But no one could ignore the shadow that had entered his palace of glass. Finally, Ronan lifted his glass, deliberate, slow, and the motion drew every eye again. His voice carried, not loud, but sharp enough to slice through the music. "Here's the truth," he said, his tone almost gentle. "The one thing money can't buy." The silence that followed was pure and fragile. Cassian froze, the mask slipping for just a heartbeat, enough for those who watched closely to glimpse the fear beneath his arrogance. Ronan finished his drink and set the glass down, the faint clink echoing louder than any applause. Somewhere near the back, one of the security guards, one of his men, met his eyes and gave the smallest nod. Everything was in motion now. The night had only begun, but the empire of glass was already cracking. The chandelier above them shimmered like a captive sun, 1,000 crystals catching light, fracturing it into fragile beauty. Beneath that brilliance, Cassian Drexler stood in his element, surrounded by applause, attention, and the intoxicating illusion of control. Yet the air had changed. The laughter that filled the hall no longer rang true. It trembled on the edge of fear. Ronan hadn't moved since his toast. He stood near the marble fountain, quiet as stone, the faint hum of the orchestra dissolving around him. His eyes followed Cassian across the room, slow, measured, inevitable. Cassian's grin returned, sharp and gleaming. He excused himself from a circle of senators and began his approach, every step deliberate, every motion for the audience. Cameras turned, the chandeliers reflected him like a crown. "Mr. Valtieri," he said, voice silked with venom. "You do have a flair for drama, don't you? Turning my gala into your little sermon." Ronan met his gaze, unflinching. "You call it drama, I call it truth." Cassian chuckled, lowering his champagne flute slightly. "Truth?" He leaned closer, the scent of his cologne thick and artificial. "You think you own truth because you crawled out of the gutters and survived a few street wars? Please, you're a relic, dirt and blood, pretending to have principles." The nearby guests went still. Evelyn, from across the hall, turned her head sharply. Marcus's jaw flexed as his hand brushed the small of his back. An old habit from years of watching things go wrong. Ronan's expression didn't shift. His calm was unnerving. "And you," he said quietly, "are a man of silk and lies." Cassian's smile faltered for a fraction of a heartbeat, enough for Ronan to see it. The crowd sensed it too, though none dared move. The tension hung between them, taut as wire. Then Cassian lifted his flute again, swirling the golden liquid. "Let's not pretend we're equals," he said, his tone dropping. "You fight in shadows. I build empires." "And yet," Ronan murmured, "we both end up in the same room." Cassian's grin returned, this time thinner, crueler. "Not for long." He tilted his glass, and with a flick of his wrist, sent a spray of champagne across Ronan's face. The crowd gasped. The droplets caught the chandelier's light mid-air, little stars suspended in time. For one perfect second, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Music died. The air turned electric. Ronan didn't move. He simply stood there, the champagne tracing down his cheek, glinting like tears that weren't his. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket, drew out a white handkerchief, and wiped his face clean. When he looked up again, the calm in his eyes was colder than steel. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. Cassian laughed, too loudly, too long. "See?" he called to the crowd, turning to them with outstretched arms. "Even the viper knows when to stay in his cage." Nervous laughter followed, brittle as glass. The orchestra began to play again, forced, trembling. But beneath the noise, something shifted. Near the exits, 2 guards repositioned themselves. By the bar, another adjusted his cuff, a signal small but unmistakable. Marcus saw it and stiffened. Those men weren't part of his team. Evelyn caught his glance from across the room. Her eyes widened, just slightly. Not fear, but understanding. She moved toward the center of the hall. Cassian turned back to Ronan, emboldened by the reaction. "You think you scare me?" he sneered. "You're just another street dog begging for relevance. You don't belong here." Ronan's lips curved faintly, almost pitying. "You built this world on other people's pain, Cassian. You just forgot pain remembers." Cassian took a step closer, voice a hiss. "You threatening me?" Ronan shook his head. "No, just reminding you that walls crack, even glass ones. The lights flickered once, briefly, unnoticed by most, but enough to draw Marcus's hand fully to his weapon. The guards around the perimeter were no longer scanning the crowd. They were watching him. Cassian, oblivious to the storm he'd summoned, lifted his chin, his laughter echoing once more. "You really think anyone here cares about your tragedy? About your dead brother, your street code, your vendettas? Look around you. This is civilization. Money wins, always." Ronan looked at him then. Truly looked. The silence that followed was suffocating, as though even the air refused to interfere. He He set his empty glass on a nearby table. "And when money burns?" he asked softly. "What do you have left?" Cassian hesitated, just enough for the mask to crack, for a flicker of something human, something terrified to show. Before he could speak again, a distant thud echoed from outside, the kind of sound that wasn't part of the music. One of the chandeliers trembled faintly. The crowd shifted nervously. Marcus barked a command into his earpiece, but the static that answered was pure white noise. Cassian turned toward the sound, confusion washing over his arrogance. "What the hell was that?" Ronan didn't answer. He just looked up, eyes catching the light, a quiet storm gathering behind them. The orchestra stumbled to a halt. Somewhere near the back, a man in a waiter's uniform locked eyes with Ronan, then disappeared into the shadows. In that suspended moment, before chaos could bloom, Cassian realized too late that the champagne wasn't humiliation. It was the trigger, and the glass empire he'd built was about to shatter. For a moment, everything was still, a tense, fragile stillness that felt like the breath before a scream. The chandeliers hummed faintly above, casting fractured light across the marble floor. Cassian's voice broke the silence first, sharp and commanding. "Marcus," he barked, "get this thug out of my sight." But Marcus didn't move. Neither did the guards flanking the walls. Cassian turned, expecting immediate obedience, but what met his gaze was hesitation. Worse, defiance. The men he paid to protect him stood rooted in place, their expressions unreadable. "What are you waiting for?" Cassian's tone rose, brittle with disbelief. "I said remove him!" Ronan stood motionless, his calm unbroken. He didn't need to speak. His silence was enough, a presence that filled the room like smoke. Then, without a word, one of the guards, the man nearest the stage, unclipped his earpiece and let it fall to the ground. The soft click of plastic against marble was deafening. Another followed, then another. Cassian's brow furrowed. "What the hell are you doing?" The first guard rolled up his sleeve. Ink glinted beneath the light, a coiled viper entwined around a dagger, inked deep in black. The Valtieri crest. Gasps rippled through the ballroom like a sudden gust of wind. Heads turned. Murmurs rose, uneasy and low. Cassian's smirk faltered. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked around wildly as one by one, the rest of his security followed suit, each revealing the same mark. His illusion of control cracked in real time. Ronan didn't move. He simply lifted his chin, a small, deliberate nod. With a heavy, metallic thud, the ballroom doors sealed shut. The locks slid into place, echoing through the golden chamber like a sentence being passed. Screams followed, muffled at first, then rising. The orchestra stopped playing entirely. Cassian turned in circles, trapped in the cage he'd built for himself. "Marcus!" he shouted again, desperate now. "Do something!" Marcus didn't answer. He stood behind Evelyn, hand subtly guiding her backward, away from the center. His face was pale, jaw tight, eyes darting toward the massive LED screens that adorned the back wall. They flickered once, then came alive. Static. A heartbeat of silence, then a video. Cassian's voice filled the room, but not from the stage, from the speakers. A recording. "Evict them. I don't care if there are children inside. Just burn the record after." The crowd turned toward the screens as images appeared. Eviction orders, hidden ledgers, footage of hired men dragging families out of their homes in Raventon's lower docks. Cassian froze. "Turn that off," he hissed. "Now!" No one moved. Another video cut in. Security camera footage, grainy but unmistakable. Cassian in his office, exchanging an envelope with a city councilman. The voice was clear. You keep zoning laws tight around the harbor. Valtieri's people won't breathe near my land again. The guests began whispering. A senator's wife covered her mouth. A tech CEO slowly stepped back, pulling his phone from his pocket, already typing furiously. Evelyn's face drained of color. She turned to her husband, eyes wide, not with fear, but with betrayal. You said all of that was gone, she whispered. Cassian's composure cracked entirely. It's fake, he shouted, gesturing wildly toward the screens. It's doctored. Lies. But the screens didn't stop. Now came the photos, faces of men and women who'd disappeared after opposing him. Whistleblowers, journalists, a charity leader whose foundation Cassian had gutted for tax cover. Every file was time-stamped, signed, authenticated. The air was thick with disbelief and disgust. People were already moving toward the exits, realizing too late they were sealed. Some pleaded with guards, but the guards didn't answer. Ronan finally spoke. No one here is in danger, he said quietly. Only the truth is. Cassian spun toward him, wild-eyed. You think this will save you? You'll be ruined too, you and your gang of sewer rats. Ronan's gaze didn't waver. I already live in the ruins you built. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. Cassian's breath came ragged. He looked toward the crowd, investors, politicians, socialites, searching for a single ally. None met his eyes. One of them, a senator who'd once boasted of their partnership, took off his cufflink and threw it on the floor. You've poisoned everything, he muttered, before walking away. Cassian stumbled back. You can't. You need me, his voice cracked. You all need me. But they didn't. Phones lit up across the room, screens glowing like tiny verdicts. Emails were being drafted, deals withdrawn, statements prepared. His empire wasn't collapsing in flames, it was dissolving in silence. Evelyn turned her gaze from the screens to her husband. You should have listened, she said softly. Even glass cuts when it breaks. Ronan watched her, then stepped closer to Cassian. His voice was low, almost kind. This isn't revenge, Cassian. It's recognition. The world finally sees what you are. Cassian's chest heaved. He looked around wildly, at the guards, the screens, the guests who now refused to look at him. His world, curated, perfected, untouchable, was unraveling thread by thread. He lunged forward suddenly, as if to strike Ronan, but Marcus stepped between them, one hand firm on Cassian's shoulder. Don't, he warned quietly. Cassian froze, trembling with rage. His reflection in the nearest glass column caught his eye. The blue tuxedo, once commanding, now ridiculous under the glare of exposure. His empire of glass reflected him back, fractured, unrecognizable. He whispered almost to himself, I built this city. Ronan tilted his head slightly. Then you should have built it on something real. The screens flickered again, final footage, muted but damning. A small boy on a dock, clutching a lifeless hand. Luca. Cassian stared at it, realization dawning too late. Ronan didn't move closer, didn't gloat. He simply turned toward the exit as the doors hissed open. The guests parted for him, silent, shaken. Behind him, Cassian sank to his knees beneath the chandelier, the same light that once crowned him, now burning like judgment. The Viper had not struck with violence. He had simply lifted the mirror and let Cassian Drexler destroy himself. The silence after ruin is never quiet. It breathes. It seeps into walls, hangs from chandeliers, crawls beneath the skin of those who remain to witness it. The ballroom of glass and gold was no longer a stage for power, but a tomb of pride. Cassian stood in the center of it, shaking. His face was drained of color, sweat glistening on his temple beneath the warm glow of 1,000 tiny bulbs. The crowd had drawn back, leaving him isolated beneath the chandelier, that monstrous glittering crown that once symbolized everything he thought he controlled. Ronan stepped forward through the haze of whispers and shutter clicks. Every movement was deliberate, soundless, the calm before something irreversible. His eyes were cold, but not cruel. They carried the weight of years spent waiting for this single moment. He stopped a few feet from Cassian and said it quietly, as though it were a prayer. "Kneel." Cassian blinked, disbelief flickering into fury. "You think—" He pointed a trembling hand at Ronan, voice cracking. "You think you can humiliate me in my own house?" Ronan didn't answer. He just stood there, still as marble, his shadow stretching long across the floor. Cassian's laugh came out uneven, too sharp. "You don't tell me what to do. I built this empire. I built this city. You're nothing, a gutter rat in a borrowed suit." The silence that followed was colder than any insult. Behind him, Marcus Vale moved, slow, heavy steps that echoed through the room. Cassian turned, startled, as the man he'd once trusted more than anyone came to stand at his back. "Marcus," Cassian breathed, relief breaking through the panic. "Finally. Get him out of here. Now." Marcus didn't move to draw his weapon. Instead, he placed a firm hand on Cassian's shoulder. "You should listen," he said quietly. Cassian froze. "What?" The grip tightened, not cruel, but final. Cassian tried to jerk free, but Marcus's strength was immovable. "Let me go," he snarled. "You work for me." Marcus leaned closer. Not anymore. The struggle that followed was pitiful. Cassian's voice broke into shouts, curses, half-choked orders no one obeyed. The crowd stood frozen, transfixed by the unraveling of a man who'd once commanded the city's every heartbeat. Ronan didn't move as Marcus's hand pressed down harder. Cassian stumbled. His knees hit the marble with a hollow crack that echoed up into the golden chandelier. The sound lingered, sharp, humiliating, irreversible. Gasps rippled through the guests. Cameras flashed, capturing the fall of a man who'd never known the meaning of humility. Cassian's breath came fast, ragged. His blue tuxedo shimmered under the lights. Now a mockery of the dignity he once wore. His palms trembled against the polished floor, leaving faint smears on the marble that reflected his broken image back at him. Ronan stepped closer, his shoes soundless on the cold stone. He stopped just inches away and crouched slightly, his voice a low murmur that only Cassian could hear. "You built your throne on bones," Ronan said. "Tonight they rise." Cassian's eyes flicked upward, hatred burning through the tears that threatened to fall. "You think this makes you better than me?" he hissed. "You're still a criminal. You'll always be filth." Ronan studied him for a long moment, not with anger, but with something far heavier. Pity. Then he reached into his jacket, withdrew the same champagne flute Cassian had used to mock him earlier, now cracked, its edge glinting under the light. He held it for a moment, letting the reflection dance across Cassian's face. Then he let it fall. The glass shattered at Cassian's knees, a soft, crystalline explosion that echoed through the silent hall. Ronan straightened, eyes steady. "There's your crown," he said quietly. The cameras flashed again. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Every angle caught him. The once untouchable billionaire, kneeling in his own mansion beneath the chandelier that once crowned his power. The marble around him glittered with shards of glass, like fragments of the empire he'd built on deceit. Cassian's lips moved soundlessly at first, then words spilled out. Desperate, hollow things. You think you've won? You'll be hunted for this. You'll... Ronan cut him off, voice steady as stone. I didn't come to win. He turned slightly, letting the crowd hear him now. I came to remind him, and all of you, that power means nothing when it's built on broken lives. The silence that followed was vast, almost reverent. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the music, forgotten somewhere behind the curtains, had died. Cassian looked up, and for the first time, the man who had owned half of Raventon looked small. The cold perfection of his face had cracked. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw and human. Fear. The chandelier above caught his reflection again, scattering it across 1,000 glittering surfaces. A man shattered in gold. Ronan stepped back, turning toward the exit. As he passed Marcus, their eyes met. No words exchanged, but a shared understanding. Justice had been served, not by law, but by consequence. The ballroom doors opened. Outside, flashes continued. Journalists, guests, bodyguards capturing the image that would haunt the city for decades. Cassian Drexler, the king of Raventon, brought to his knees not by violence, but by truth. Ronan paused at the threshold and looked over his shoulder one last time. Cassian still knelt beneath the chandelier, staring blankly at the shattered glass glinting like the remnants of his own reflection. Peace, Ronan murmured to himself, echoing the invitation that had started it all. It was never peace. Just the quiet before the reckoning. Then he walked out into the night, and behind him, the empire of glass continued to fall, piece by piece, into silence. Dawn spread over Raventon City like an uninvited witness. Pale light crawling over towers of mirrored glass, touching every secret the night had tried to hide. The skyline glittered with headlines now, the name Cassian Drexler echoing through every channel, every ticker, every whisper. Empire of Lies falls, Drexler exposed, the king of Raventon uncrowned. Inside what was once his fortress, the mansion of chandeliers and gold-veined marble, silence had finally claimed the halls. The fountains had stopped running, the staff had vanished, and the portraits that once lined the walls were now faces of mockery. Every news drone that hovered outside captured the wreckage of pride. The fall of a man who once thought himself untouchable. Cassian sat alone in his study, the same room where he had signed his empires into existence. The air still smelled faintly of smoke and spilled champagne. The shattered flute Ronan had dropped beside his knees had been swept away, but its echo lingered, the crack of humiliation that wouldn't fade. On the desk, papers were scattered like dying leaves, subpoenas, resignation letters, emergency account freezes. The Drexler logo, once embossed in gold on everything he owned, now seemed to mock him. Every ring of his phone brought another collapse, investors withdrawing, lawyers defecting, his own board voting him out before the ink of the scandal had even dried. He tried to call Evelyn. The line rang once, then stopped. She had left before dawn, escorted by 2 bodyguards who once swore loyalty to him. Her closet was empty. The last thing she said before walking out the door, her voice trembling, not with fear but with revulsion, was, "You made us all believe you were the light. You were just the flame." Outside, police vans lined the gates. Reporters shouted his name. Drones blinked like vultures circling a corpse. When the doorbell rang, he didn't flinch. It was the sound of inevitability. They came in black suits, efficient and wordless. His signature pen was taken. His devices confiscated. The chandelier under which he had ruled like a modern Caesar now reflected only dust and footsteps. As they led him past the grand staircase, flashes went off through the windows. Cameras. Always cameras. But none of them saw the truth behind his eyes, the hollow terror of a man finally stripped of illusion. He was no longer the host of Raventon's finest. He was the exhibit. Later, as he sat in the back of the black van, wrists bare, he stared at the city through the glass. Billboards that once carried his name now displayed headlines of his ruin. A digital screen across the street looped an image of that moment under the chandelier. Him kneeling, Ronan standing above him like judgment itself. He remembered every word of it, every syllable. You built your throne on bones. Tonight they rise. The words replayed in his mind like a curse, or perhaps a truth too long avoided. That night, as he lay in the cell of his own making, no bars, just silence, he saw flashes of his past arrogance, the deals made in shadows, the lives ruined beneath his contracts, the men he buried under debts and fear. They flickered before him like broken film reels, one by one, until all that was left was his reflection in the dark window. A man he no longer recognized. He whispered to the darkness. He was right. Across the city, in a quiet office above the Valea waterfront, Ronan Valtieri watched the sunrise. His desk was empty save for one photograph, a boy with gentle eyes, and a smile too young for the world's cruelty. Luca. He traced the edge of the frame with his thumb, not smiling, not frowning, just breathing. The satisfaction he felt wasn't triumph. It was stillness. Through the glass, he could see the faint plume of smoke from Drexler's estate in the distance. The city had turned its hunger elsewhere already. That was how it always went. One empire fell, another began to rise. But not his. He had no throne left to claim, no mansion to rebuild. He reached for the photograph one last time. It's done, he murmured. The words barely left his lips before he placed the frame inside a drawer, closing it gently, as though laying a ghost to rest. Outside, the sun crested fully over the city. Raventon was awake again, a city reborn from ruin, indifferent yet alive. Somewhere beneath that light, the echoes of power, pride, and vengeance dissolved into silence. And for the first time in years, Ronan let himself breathe without the weight of the past pressing on his chest. The morning light over Raventon was brittle, pale and sharp, cutting through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the once grand Drexler penthouse. Dust hung in the air, turning the gold-trimmed furniture into relics of a vanished kingdom. Somewhere far below, the city carried on. Cars, sirens, life. But up here, time had stopped. Cassian Drexler hadn't slept. His eyes were hollow, his mind a blur of flashing headlines and whispered betrayal. The television played on mute, showing his name on every channel, his face on every ticker. The empire he built from greed and ego was now an open wound, dissected for public consumption. Then came the knock. It was soft. Too soft. Not the pounding of the police, not the metallic buzz of delivery drones. Just two quiet taps that seemed to echo through the marble like a heartbeat. He hesitated before opening the door. On the threshold sat a small black box. Plain, elegant, deliberate. No return label, no courier in sight. Just the package, as though it had materialized out of guilt and memory. He carried it to the dining table, his hands trembling slightly. The penthouse was silent except for the whisper of the city far below. With a slow breath, he untied the cord. Inside, wrapped in black velvet, lay shards of glass, jagged, glinting under the morning light like frozen tears. He didn't need to ask what they were. He knew. The champagne flute from the gala, the one that shattered beside his knees. A single note rested on the top of the velvet, simple, handwritten. For your next toast, remember who made you kneel. RV. He stared at the initials. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, cold, the same calm precision that Ronan Valtieri had wielded that night under the chandelier. Cassian's throat tightened. He picked up one shard, small enough to fit between his fingers. The reflection staring back at him was fractured, 100 pieces of a man who once thought himself unbreakable. The edges caught the light, and for a moment he could see himself as the world now did. Not a billionaire, not a visionary, but a relic of arrogance. He turned the shard over and over, his fingers brushing against the tiny cracks. Blood beaded from a shallow cut, and he didn't even flinch. Death, he realized, would have been mercy. Humiliation was the true punishment, a slow rot that ate from within. Every headline, every whisper, every pointed silence reminded him that he had once been the man everyone wanted to be. Now he was a cautionary tale. He laughed then, a sound brittle as the glass in his hand. The city outside didn't echo it. No one was listening anymore. He poured himself a drink, the habit too deep to die. The liquid shimmered in the light, golden and mocking. He raised the glass, his voice breaking into a whisper. To the Viper. He drank alone. Across the city, Ronan Valtieri stood before a small altar in his quiet office. The candlelight flickered against framed photographs. Luca as a boy, smiling beside him by the lake. Their mother in the old house before it all went wrong. The same warmth that had been stolen years ago by men like Cassian Drexler. He struck a match and lit the final candle. The flame danced, soft and alive. He didn't pray, he hadn't done that in years. But he closed his eyes and whispered, "It's done, Luca." The city stretched beyond the window, alive with noise and light. Somewhere within that vastness, justice had been served, though it brought no joy. Only stillness. Ronan picked up his coat and stepped toward the balcony. The skyline shimmered beneath him. Raventon's towers glittering like watchful eyes. Wind tugged at his collar as he stared into the horizon, his expression unreadable. Below, life continued. Deals were made. Lies were told. New kings were being crowned. But one truth lingered in the city's pulse. A truth whispered from rooftop to boardroom, from the criminal underworld to the highest floors of power. It began, as all legends do, with arrogance. The billionaire flicked champagne in the Mafia boss's face and laughed. Seconds later, he was beaten to his knees. Some men fall by bullets, others fall by truth. If this story has your attention, hit that subscribe button and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Every story we tell connects the past to the present, and we'd love to have you with us for the next one.